some retrofit as well. So I'm here to talk about the history of heating our homes and how heat pumps can help turn them to sustainable. So there's a photo on the left-hand side of a typical Kirklees house. So that is a terrace of houses built over 100 years ago, chimneys with lots of fires in there. And the picture on the right-hand side is a picture of a man looking very smug because he's drinking coffee in a nice, warm, sustainable house. And the question is, can we get there? So where have we come from? This is a picture of the inside of one of those houses. So when the houses were built, they were heated with a coal fire, and you can see just at the end of the room there's a range. So you had a coal fire in the middle, one side was a hot water tank, the other side was an oven. So that was the fire that was lit in the morning, it was kept in all day, and that was the heart of the home. And although you might have had fires in bedrooms or other rooms of the house, they were never lit. You know, maybe Sunday afternoon if you were lucky, but there would be one room of the house that was kept warm. And that's how my grandparents and lots of grandparents lived. Right, so what I'm looking at now is how has technology changed over time. So it's the Jubilee, we just had the Queen's Jubilee. So I'm looking at the Queen's Jubilee and what's happened in that time. The columns are 20-year chunks. So we go on, and there's the Queen's Jubilee. So she was on the throne from 1952 to still now. So that's 70 years. And if we look at what has happened with technology over that 70-year period, I'll just step through some of those things. So first of all, motorways. So 1960s, well, 1950s actually was the first motorway in England, the M1. The M4 motorway was new when I was a lad, so I cycled along it on my push bike because they just finished it and they hadn't opened it to traffic. So that's how new motorways are. Jet aircraft came in the 1960s. So before the 1960s, you had hardly any international travel. You probably wouldn't be going to and from China. You wouldn't be going to Greece. You wouldn't be going to Spain for your holidays. So jet aircraft only came in the 1960s. We're talking about houses in particular. So the good old gas central heating boiler. So hands up, who's got a gas central heating boiler in the house? Quite a few. Yeah, it was. Normally, it's about 80% in the UK of homes have got a gas central heating boiler. It's the main way people heat their homes. So you have a small box and radiators, and that's how homes were heated. But that only started in 1960. Before the 1960, people didn't have central heating in their homes. And even by the year 2000, it was only 90% of the homes. Not all homes had central heating in 2000. So, and we go on to another little bit of technology, containers. You know, so the good old container was invented in the 1950s. That enabled global trade. So that kicked off the container ships. By the 1980s, we had globalization properly. And that's when, you know, China really kicked off their manufacturing and so on. So that's the background. And so that period was the Queen's Jubilee. Now looking at another period, this is 80 years. So the middle of the board is the gap is sort of 2020, which is where we are now, or just beyond. So I was expecting this to have a few other architecture students, who are mostly PhDs, so you're a bit older. So for students who are 20 years old, you know, they just started and they'll have another 60 odd years of their life. So the time that a lot of you are on is the same sort of period that the Queen's been on the throne, and we're looking at how technology is going to change and how carbon changes over that time. So the thing with technology is that technology drives fossil fuel use, and the fossil fuel use is what's driving carbon. So that's how CO2 production has grown over the Queen's lifetime. So it's risen dramatically, and carbon has been doubling every 24 years. So for people who are more than 30 years old, over half of the carbon that's ever been put into the world ever is in your lifetime. And for the Queen, I haven't got it on there, there we are. For the Queen, 90% of all the CO2 that's been put into the world ever is in her lifetime, so we can blame her for it all. But basically, technology drives carbon. So if you want to change carbon, you have to change technology. You can obviously save the use. You can just say, well, I'm going to leave my car and walk everywhere. But in general, you have to change technology to change carbon. And just running through a couple of slides, which you all know, this is carbon driving climate. So the curve that we've got here in the light blue is let's carry on life as normal. We carry on with normal daily activities. The CO2 output's been increasing. It carries on increasing a little bit more, gradually tailing off. And that's the path that we're on at the moment. The green arrows here are the Paris Promise. So Paris says that by 2030, we're going to halve our CO2 footprint. By 2050, it's zero. By 2070, it's negative. So that's what the politicians said they were going to do, but it's not what we're actually doing, as we all know. So, and that's what it means for the climate. The two numbers that were up there, the SSP 3.7 and SSP 1.9, are the carbon trajectories which are used for driving the climate models. So the IPC runs a bunch of climate models, and that gets you the output. So the blue line is the one that we're on at the moment. We're 1.2 at the moment. We'll be at 1.5 in 10 years or so. We'll pass through 2 degrees when you're about sort of 50 or 60. And towards the end of your lives, it's going to be 3 degrees, which, as we know, means food crop failures, loads of floods. That's basically where we're at. If we wanted to be on the green line, then we have to have the green carbon trajectory. So you need to have a lot of change at carbon if we want to have a future. So there's the analogy of being on a coach. You know, we're all sitting on a coach, and what's happening to the coach? And basically, it's heading hotter, and the coach is going over the cliff. So if we carry on as we are, the coach goes over the cliff. Unless we have radical change in the next 2 to 5 years, which we might do, who can say? So back to homes, and we start out with the humble gas fire. Now, what happened in the UK was people got fed up with their coal fires, so they went over to having a gas fire. So hands up who recognises one of those. Right, a reasonable number of people recognise the gas fire. Youngsters won't see them so much. The gas fire was 3 kilowatts, so same heat output as the old fire. And what happened is you'd have one room in your house, your front room would have the gas fire in, which is where your granny sat in front of that fire, 3 kilowatts. And then, of course, we went on to central heating in 2020. And if you imagine 7 of those fires in a row, that's 21 kilowatts. The average central heating boiler is 20 to 30 kilowatts. Go and have a look at yours, it will be at least 20 kilowatts. So your little central heating boiler hiding in a cupboard is equivalent to 7 of those gas fires. Is why home heating is 20% of the UK's carbon footprint. And that's what's driving the coach over the cliff. So we know that gas is ghastly for heating homes. It's cheap at the moment. It's killing the future. So what's the alternatives? We start out with our gas boiler, which is using gas. What you could do is obviously just get rid of your gas boiler and put in electric heating. So you put in panel heaters or fan heaters and whatever else, or you can put in a heat pump. So those are the main options that you've got for heating your homes. And if you look at the cost of doing that, the gas cost at the moment is 8 pence a kilowatt. Electricity costs 33 pence a kilowatt, sorry, kilowatt hour. And a heat pump, you're still using the electricity, but you're getting some heat for free, so it works out cheaper. So I'm now going to talk about heat pumps for a bit. Heat pumps are magic. Here's a heat pump. They take heat from outside and they pump it up in temperature and release it inside using some electricity. So there we are, that's a heat pump. They're only a bit magic. So the next slide, magically, will say, if you want it hotter, you need to use more electricity. So I love this transition. So you can have a small amount of temperature with a small amount of electricity, or if you want to pump it up hotter, you have more electricity and you get heat at a higher temperature. That is about coefficient of performance, which I'll talk about on the next slides. So this is the key heat pump graph. And because all of you with a gas boiler in the next few years going to be buying a heat pump, this is what you need to know about. So the coefficient of performance is how much heat you get out divided by how much electricity you put in. And the other way of putting the same formula is the amount of electricity you need to heat your home is the heat that it needs divided by the COP. So the bigger the COP, the less your electricity you're going to use. And here's the graph. So you can see that it's harder to heat. It's harder to heat pump to. It's harder to pump heat up to higher temperature, so it uses more electricity. And the flow temperature is the thing which is important. So if you have a gas heating boiler, it's producing hot water, and the hot water goes through your radiators. An air source heat pump produces hot water, and it produces hot water at what's called the flow temperature, and that's the important thing. So you can have a heat pump working at 40 degrees flow temperature, and the COP will be about 4. Or if you make it pump hotter, you'll be pumping up sort of 65 degrees. The COP is around about 2, so it's really sensitive to flow temperature. And the thing to remember is gas is 4 times cheaper than electricity, and because a gas boiler is not 100%, so if the COP is less than about 3.5, it's going to cost you more to run your heat pump than the old gas boiler that you've just taken out. And if you're operating down the right-hand end and you're using your heat pump to pump up to 60, 65, your electricity might cost you twice as much as your old gas boiler. So if you were paying £1,000 a year for your gas, you were paying £2,000 a year to run your heat pump. So what does that mean? Lazy design or good design? You can go for lazy design, which is what a lot of heat pump installers do. And they say, we've got radiators in our house running at 60 degrees, which is what your gas boiler runs at. And you've got a hot water tank running at 60 degrees, which is what your gas boiler does. So you put your heat pump in doing that, and they'll just say, well, we'll just put a heat pump in, everything's fine. And it is until you pay your bills, because it's going to cost you twice as much to run. So good design has double the size of radiators. So you, rather than having your standard size radiator running at 60, you have a double size radiator running at 40 degrees. Or you put in underfloor heating. But with underfloor heating, the radiator is the size of the room. So you run underfloor heating at 35C under there. You run your water tank at 45. Now I shower nicely at 40 degrees. My wife wants 45. So 45 is absolutely fine for anyone to have a shower. But what you do have to do is once a week, you have to boost your hot water up to 60 to kill the Legionella bacteria. Or you don't worry about Legionella and you just leave it at 45 all the time. So there we are. Oh, the other thing is if you have air conditioning, an air source heat pump produces hot water. Air conditioning, like we've got in here, produces hot air. So the refrigerant goes directly to the hot air, and that runs at about 35. So what's the options for homes? Well, we can stay as we are now. So we heat the whole house. We've got 7 gas fires worth of boiler, and it's 20 kilowatts. We can put a heat pump in. So a lot of people who are putting heat pumps in, they'll put in something like a 15 kilowatt heat pump. And that's, if you get an installer to put in a heat pump, that's the sort of size thing that they'll do. What you'll notice is the heat pump, even though physically it's much bigger than your boiler and it costs might cost sort of 8-10 grand, it's only half the size. So when you turn your air source heat pump on in the morning on a cold winter's day, it's going to take twice as long to heat your house up as your old boiler did, because it's half the size. So some people who put in heat pumps find that the house is not as responsive and they have to keep it on ticking over at night to make sure it's warm enough in the daytime, which means it costs you a bit more to run. You can do a deep retrofit. So a deep retrofit is, as you probably know, you put lots of insulation around the walls and the floor and the ceiling. You make it airtight, you have to put in ventilation, and then you put in a heat pump. So I went over to Ireland and they were doing that. So rather than having 50 millimetres of cavity wall insulation, they stuck in another 100 millimetres on the outside of the wall. So you got 150 mil of wall insulation, and you make it airtight. And then you can have, we were visiting some homes, 200 square metre homes, nice detached home, and they were putting in an 8 kilowatt heat pump, but they said you could run it quite nicely on a 5 kilowatt. The house is so well insulated that in the spring and the autumn, you don't need the heating on at all. In the winter, you'll need it ticking over a little bit, but it will cost you almost nothing to run. Or you can do what we did, which was a cheat, and you do a targeted retrofit, and you go back to the Victorians. So we put in a 3 kilowatt air conditioning unit just for the main room that we live in. So we've got a living kitchen, and that's where we put the air conditioning. We put a little bit of insulation in to keep the heat into that room. So we're running that on a 3 kilowatt air conditioner. So what's that mean? If you look at those 4 options, what's it mean for costs? So you've got an installation cost and the running cost. With the as now position, obviously it doesn't cost you anything to install, and it costs you a bit to run it, and it's going to cost you more with the cost of living crisis. You can put in a heat pump. It will cost you about 20 grand. The UK government gives you about half of it back. I think the boiler upgrade scheme is 10 grand. It will probably cost you a bit more than your gas central heating unless you spend a lot of money on insulation. If you do a deep retrofit, it will cost 50 to 100,000 pounds. It's a lot of money. If you're in Ireland, you get half of that back. You get half of it back from the government. They'll give you 35,000 euros to retrofit your home, but your running costs are tiny. Or you do what we did, which is you just spend about 20 grand on an air conditioning, little bit of insulation, and it costs you less than the old thing, but you're not heating the whole house. So it is a bit of a cheat. I've renamed those. So the life as normal I've called Coach Over the Cliff, because that's where we're going. Just putting a heat pump in the house, I've called the light green con. It's light green because you're not doing a full retrofit, and it's a bit of a con because it's going to cost you more to run, probably. The deep green home is the full retrofit. That's the full deep retrofit. And the little green snug is where you're just doing one room. What's it mean for the people in the house? Well, the parents in the Coach Over the Cliff are happy because it's just the same as now. But the kids are really pissed off because they're not going to have a future. Light green con, in which case the parents may not be that happy, especially when they start paying the bills. The kids are happy because house is normal, you know, it's green electricity, so you're fine. The deep green home, the parents are really happy because they're heroes. They've done the right thing for the environment. They've got a house which is really comfortable, it's really warm, it's dead cheap to run, it's worth more than they bought it for, and the kids are happy as well because it's always nice and warm. The little green snug is okay for the parents, probably, because they've heated the room, but it's a difficult sell to the teenage children who are in an unheated bedroom. So that's not right for everybody, but it has some places for some people. The deep green home is the Irish policy. So that is Irish national policy. They're doing it now, and they will have retrofitted 25% of their homes by 2030. So they're getting on with it. England policy is just carry on as now, and they're putting a little tiny bit of money into boiler upgrade schemes. So originally it was 90,000 homes they put in the money for, which is less than 1% of UK homes. So that's UK policy. So we finish off and say, will we get warm, sustainable homes in Kirklees? Well, the UK government could copy the Irish policies, in which case they're all proven. In that case, we'll get warm, comfortable homes. There are some side benefits, which I can't read on that without my glasses, but there we are. The side effects are it will boost the local economy. You'll have a better balance of payments because you're not buying as many oils and things. You reduce the dependency on dodgy petrostates. You reduce fuel poverty, and you enhance the value of the building stock. So those are all the sidelines that you get for that one. Or, or we can carry on as we are and drive us over the cliff. So there we are. That's the option. So we're all in this golden generation. We're living one of the best qualities of life, but we're gradually seeing it being destroyed. And I'm trying to get houses warm, and I'm fighting for us to copy what Ireland's doing. Thanks.